Chapter 7 of Stories from God's Holy Book by Josephine Looney. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Moses. All afternoon, Bobby and Patricia had been working with bright-colored strips of construction paper. Bobby showed Joe a lantern he had made of blue, green, and red to look like the neon lights on the corner grocery store. Patricia was very proud of a basket she had woven of red and white strips. "That reminds me of the basket Moses was hidden in when he was a baby," Joe told the children. "Who was Moses?" Patricia asked. "I've never known anyone with that name." "The name Moses means 'saved from the waters,'" Joe explained. "When Moses was a tiny baby, he was left on the river bank in a basket. The king's daughter found him there. That was why she gave him that name." "Who would leave a tiny baby on the river bank?" Patricia demanded indignantly. "Shall I tell you the story?" Joe looked from one eager face to the other. "Yes!" cried the two voices in chorus. "Do you remember," began Joe, "how Joseph was taken to Egypt and sold there?" "Oh, yes," responded Bobby. "He became the governor, and he ruled over his brothers just as the dream said he would." "And after Joseph forgave his brothers for selling him," put in Patricia, "Jacob's whole family moved to Egypt." "That's exactly right," said Joe. "Well, Jacob's family got to be very large. The children grew up and had children of their own. Then these children grew up and had children. As the years went on, there were thousands and thousands of these people. They had a special name. They were called Jews. Another name for them was Israelites. The Jews were happy in Egypt for 400 years. But at last there were so many of them, the Egyptians began to be afraid of them. So the king of Egypt did a wicked thing. He said that all Jewish baby boys must be killed, so they could not grow up to fight against the Egyptians. "Oh, what a bad king!" cried Patricia. "I wouldn't have let him kill my baby." "Moses' mother felt the same way," replied Joe. "For 3 months she hid Moses in her house. No one knew she had a baby. But at last she knew she couldn't keep the secret any longer. So she wove a basket of straw. She rubbed tar over it to keep out the water. Then she bundled her baby inside it and took the basket down to the river. She knew the king's daughter came there every day to bathe. So she left Moses there in the tall grasses. Moses' sister hid nearby to see what would happen." "What if the king's daughter had been as bad as her father?" Patricia asked. "But she wasn't," answered Joe. "When she heard the baby cry, she looked for the basket. She saw the beautiful little child inside and said, 'I will keep this baby for my own.' When Moses' sister heard this, she came up to the princess. She said, 'I know a nurse who will take good care of this baby for you. Shall I bring her?' 'Yes,' said the princess. 'Please bring the nurse here.' So Moses' sister ran home and got, who do you suppose?" "Moses' mother?" asked Patricia. "Yes, she brought Moses' mother to the princess. 'Here is the nurse,' she said. And the princess hired Moses' mother to take care of Moses till he grew up." "God must have been watching over Moses the whole time," observed Patricia in a pleased tone. "He was," said Joe. "God loved Moses very much, and he had some very important work for Moses to do." "What was the important work?" demanded Bobby. "First of all, Moses had to teach the Jews about God's law. They knew some of the things God wanted them to do. But God was going to tell Moses many other things He wanted them to do. You see, God loved the Jews in a special way. He had wonderful plans for them. Do you remember what God promised Adam and Eve when the gates of heaven were closed?" "Yes," responded Patricia promptly. "He promised to send Jesus, His only Son, to open the gates again." "Good," said Joe. "Well, when the time would come for Jesus to be born on earth, He was going to be born a Jew. So God loved the Jews because His Son was going to be one of them. All through the ages He taught them about Himself. The Jews were the only people in the world who knew about the one true God. Now God was going to have Moses lead the Jews out of Egypt. I told you that the king of Egypt was being very cruel to them. So God said, 'Moses, lead my people out of Egypt into the promised land.'" "What was the promised land?" came from Bobby. "It was the land of Palestine. You remember that Jacob's family came from Palestine to Egypt hundreds of years before. Now God was sending them all back to Palestine again. It was such a fine land that God said, "It will flow with milk and honey." Moses did as God told him. He went to the king and said, "The one true God has spoken to me. He wants me to lead all the Jews out of Egypt." At first, just because the Jews wanted to go away, the wicked king said, "No." But God made the king listen to Moses, and at last the king had to let the Jews go. "How many Jews were there?" asked Bobby. "The Bible tells us that more than 500,000 men followed Moses out of Egypt," Joe answered. "Besides that, there were the women and children. Altogether they made a vast army as they moved along the road out of the land of Egypt. Tomorrow I will tell you about their adventures on the way to the Promised Land." End of chapter 7.